Israel says they carried out a strike against a school in Gaza, killing several Hamas militants, but Hamas and Al Jazeera say it was all women and children. We'll talk about what we know so far around that event, as well as a significant Hezbollah strike in northern Israel, a covert Israeli operation to influence the opinion of U.S. politicians, and the ceasefire deal proposed by President Biden last week that at this point kind of looks like it was set up to fail. It's a lot to get into, so I'm glad you're here. Now, starting with the strike in Gaza, Israel says overnight they eliminated several Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists who embedded themselves inside of a UNRWA school. They say their fighter jets conducted a precise strike on a Hamas compound embedded inside the school in the area of Nusrat. I'm going to pull up a map here to show you where that is in the Gaza Strip. Again, starting with an overview of Israel, moving into the southwest portion here, the Gaza Strip. Nusrat is to the south of this strip that Israel has cleared recently, right here in the middle of the screen. So like much of Gaza, a densely packed urban environment. They say the terrorists that were targeted in this strike belong to the Nukba forces who participated in the October 7th massacre into Israeli territory. Israel added that before the strike, a number of steps were taken to reduce the risk of harming uninvolved civilians, including conducting aerial surveillance and additional intelligence information. We have not seen, or I have not seen, footage of that strike released by Israel at this point. They say that the terror operatives in that building were there to plan and advance attacks against Israeli forces in the immediate time frame. So they were planning operations to be carried out in the next couple days even against Israeli forces operating in the area. Israel also estimates that between 20 and 30 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives were gathered at the school when it was struck. They say that they were separated in 3 different classrooms, separate from an area where quite a few civilians were sheltering in and around the school. Additionally, Israel says that they delayed the strike twice as they worked to fine-tune the weaponeering, the strike location, and the exact target to reduce the possibility of harming civilians. Now, Hamas put out a statement shortly thereafter saying that at least 27 people were killed in this strike, adding, quote, "The horrific massacre committed by the criminal occupation army at dawn today against displaced civilians in the UNRWA school in the Nusrat refugee camp, which caused the death of about 40 martyrs and dozens of wounded civilians, is a crime committed with premeditation by the Nazi Zionist entity, which felt impunity under the failure of the international community to play its role in protecting civilians from the crime of genocide and ethnic cleansing that is being committed in full view of the world." Hamas does not speak out or release statements around every single strike that Israel carries out. In fact, they're commenting on this one, and doing so right away is kind of an indicator that we're going to see a lot of press about this specific strike in the coming days. Now, Al Jazeera added an article about this, saying that an Israeli air attack on a UN-run school sheltering displaced Palestinians in central Gaza's Nusrat camp killed at least 40 people, mainly women and children, according to local government officials. Worth noting that in the Al Jazeera write-up, at least the one that I was able to find earlier today, there was no mention of any sort of militants being engaged in this strike. So no mention of Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or anyone else being targeted, killed, or wounded in this strike. From Al Jazeera, just women and children. From CNN, this is the closest we have to any sort of impartiality on the ground at this point, I would say. But they're getting this from a journalist in the area working with CNN, so not necessarily a CNN employee. According to that person on the ground, they say the school was hit by at least 3 missiles that penetrated the 3-story building. The facility was believed to be housing approximately 20,000 displaced people who had taken shelter in the school, its yard, and the surrounding area. So not 20,000 in that school. That wouldn't fit. There's no way they'd be in there. What we're kind of piecing together here is that Israel struck the school itself, 2 or 3 strikes, depending on the source you look at. And Israel saying that they were able to target specific areas, maybe a room or a specific classroom with an airstrike, killing those militants and reducing the overall impact to civilians in the area. However, if there really are 20,000 displaced people in and around this school complex, the chances of 0 civilian casualties is 0. It's not going to happen. It's just impossible to carry out any sort of airstrike with that density of civilians and not produce some degree of civilian casualties. Of course, this information is all just starting to come out now, so we'll wait for more clarity here in the couple days. Now, shifting up north to the fight with Hezbollah. Hezbollah yesterday claimed responsibility for destroying an Israeli Iron Dome missile defense system, which is notable. It's not the first time they've necessarily targeted the Iron Dome systems, but it looks like it might be the first time they've ever destroyed one. Now, a little bit of clarity on that. We do have this video that Hezbollah released showing a guided missile being directed, kind of like an anti-tank guided missile, being directed onto the Iron Dome system. The video notably does not show the aftermath of the strike, so we don't have anything smoking or on fire or clear indication that the Iron Dome was destroyed. But of course, looking at the footage, it looks an awful lot like it was hit, at the very least, by this missile. Worth noting, the IDF does say that they're unaware of any damage to any of their Iron Dome launchers. Now, there's a couple different ways you can read this. First off, Israel has multiple Iron Dome launchers located across northern Israel. It's likely that Hezbollah knows where at least a few of these are, and they have the capabilities to strike those, like we saw in this video here. They've probably tried multiple times before, so it's not clear if this is a deliberate strike leading to something further, kind of setting the stage for maybe a larger missile or rocket attack, or if it was a target of opportunity and they just saw the opening and decided to take advantage. Now, all of this does come amidst kind of increasing tensions between Hezbollah and Israel just in the last few weeks. For the most part, both parties have done a pretty good job, all things considered, of kind of keeping the conflict contained. And it hasn't really escalated all that much. You know, more strikes here or there, deeper strikes here or there, but no real concerns that it's going to bleed over into a larger conflict. Israel, as of late, has been putting out a lot of statements kind of indicating that war with Hezbollah is, for lack of a better term, imminent. The chief of the general staff, Lieutenant General Halevi, put out a statement just a few days ago saying, "We are approaching the point where a decision will have to be made, and the IDF is prepared and very ready for this decision. We've been striking here for 8 months, and Hezbollah is paying a very, very high price. Hezbollah has increased its attacks in recent days, and we are prepared after a very good process of training up to the level of the general staff exercise to move to an offensive in the north. Strong defense, ready for an offensive. We are approaching a decision point." This is not the first time we've heard Israel talk about having to make a decision about operations in the north. At the very baseline, there's tens of thousands of internally displaced Israeli civilians that are no longer living in their homes, in their communities in northern Israel, and Israel wants to get them back home. And a way to do that is to eliminate, if not significantly degrade, the Hezbollah capabilities in the southern portion of Lebanon, probably trying to push them back north across the Litani River. Now, adding to that, earlier today, the chief of the IDF Northern Command, Major General Ori Gordon, put out a statement saying, "Last week we completed preparations for an attack in the north. I meet with the troops and commanders. They are training and determined. I'm sure they will be able to face any task against the Hezbollah terror organization. We are prepared and ready, and when we will be ordered, the enemy will meet a strong and ready army." And now there's something worth considering is right now it looks like there's around 3 Israeli brigades in the north. Most estimates that I've seen are talking about Israel using between 9 and 12 brigades before they do any sort of ground operation into Lebanon. Now, it's unlikely that we would see 12 brigades mass on the border and then kick something off, but there is a bit of a process of moving that quantity of men, material, equipment, arms to the northern border. So I wouldn't think that any sort of Israeli invasion into Lebanon is going to happen here in the coming days. We'd probably need to see at least 2 to 3 times the number of brigades shift up north to prepare for that operation. But either way, what we're seeing right now, the tit for tat, multiple occasions, these in past instances, these strikes would have led to a significant escalation. But kind of the status quo has been set in a way to where Israel taking out Hezbollah commanders, destroying launch sites multiple times a day is kind of normal and not really grounds to increase the tempo of attacks. And the same goes the other way. Not long ago, prior to October 7th, Hezbollah taking out an Iron Dome or claiming to take out an Iron Dome missile system would have been grounds for a very significant Israeli retaliation. So just, again, worth noting, we have to keep an eye on the northern border. That is where, if you think the fighting in Gaza has been bad from a military perspective, the northern fight with Hezbollah would be magnitudes worse. Quite a few more dead and wounded than what we've seen so far. Now, Haaretz and the New York Times released an interesting article yesterday talking about an investigative piece, talking about how Israel has been running a covert information operation to sway U.S. politicians. We're going to run through that here because there's some pretty interesting aspects. Now, this is notable because this is the first documented case of the Israeli government organizing a covert campaign to influence U.S. government officials. Every government does this. That's part of the information war. And these information wars wage whether or not there is an active war ongoing. So governments trying to influence other governments, nothing new at all. The big takeaway here is it looks like this was actually uncovered and able to be proven by some internet organizations. So they say the covert campaign was commissioned by Israel's Minister of Diaspora Affairs, a government body that connects Jews around the world with the state of Israel. The ministry allocated about $2 million to the operation and hired Stoic, a political marketing firm in Tel Aviv, to carry it out. More on this in a second, but $2 million is not an awful lot for a significant information campaign. There's multiple countries, probably companies, I'm sure, companies you've never heard of in the United States that spend a lot more than that on digital marketing, probably in a quarter, let alone in a year. So $2 million is a pretty small budget, all things considered. They added that the campaign began in October and remains active on X at its peak, or Twitter. At its peak, it used hundreds of fake accounts that posed as real Americans on X, Facebook, and Instagram to post pro-Israel comments. The accounts focused on U.S. lawmakers, particularly who are black and Democrats, such as Representative Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader from New York, and Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, with posts urging them to continue funding Israel's military. From most of what I've seen, that kind of tends to be the theme of all of this, is just support Israel, look at the brutal fight they're up against. We have to stand on the side of Israel is by and large kind of the direction these posts were taking. They added that most of them were written by ChatGPT, so kind of a little new flavor to all of this. And they also used ChatGPT to create 3 fake English language news sites that featured pro-Israel articles. Now, they added that the campaign did not have widespread impact. This is according to Meta and OpenAI. They said the fake accounts accumulated more than 40,000 followers across X, Facebook, and Instagram, but many of those followers may have been bots and did not generate a large audience. This is very similar to a report Stanford put out a few years ago where the United States was kind of uncovered trying to do something very similar, spread kind of pro-Western news and speak out against especially China and Russia throughout portions of the Middle East. And they were putting out all this content and nobody was seeing it. And the only people sharing it were other bots. So it was like a big network that didn't actually reach anyone. It feels very similar to what Israel put together here. They say the effort was sloppy. In at least 2 instances, accounts with profile photos of black men posted about being a middle-aged Jewish woman. So, bots being bots. We're kind of used to that at this point. They did say that last week, Meta and OpenAI published reports attributing the influence campaign to Stoic. Meta said it had removed 510 Facebook accounts, 11 Facebook pages, 32 Instagram accounts, and 1 Facebook group tied to the operation. Most of the posts, however, remain active on X. So my big takeaway here is don't go on Facebook. What a mess. I haven't been on that platform in quite a while. But the majority of the accounts targeted here apparently were on Facebook. Notable that in all of these reports, I never see anything about YouTube or TikTok for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why that is, given the reach of those 2 platforms. But either way, that's what we have so far from this influence campaign put together by Israel. Israel notably came out saying that they have nothing to do with Stoic. They have nothing to do with this campaign. So, investigative reporting, that's kind of where it sits right now. Then turning to the ceasefire agreement that President Biden put forward on May 31st that hasn't gone anywhere, and understandably so when you get into some of the details here. So on May 31st, Biden said, quote, "Now after intensive diplomacy carried out by my team and my many conversations with leaders of Israel, Qatar, and Egypt, and other Middle Eastern countries, Israel has offered a comprehensive new proposal." So the kind of way to read that, and I think the way a lot of people read that, was Israel has agreed to this, and it's the United States presenting this now to the public. It doesn't look like that's actually what happened, or at least, the very least, there's some confusion about some of the details there. Netanyahu quickly came out and said the claim that we agreed to a ceasefire without our conditions being met is incorrect. And we have senior leaders inside of the Israeli government calling out significant gaps between what Biden presented and what the Israeli government had agreed to. One of them said Israel has not changed its conditions to reach a permanent ceasefire. That will only happen after our objectives are met, including destroying Hamas's military and governing capabilities. And they added, and I thought this was interesting, it's strange that they say it's an Israeli proposal and at the same time that Israel needs to agree to it. It's a valid point. If it's an Israeli proposal, then you would kind of assume that Israel has already agreed to it. And the kind of pushback here coming from National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby was saying, quote, "We're confident that Biden's speech accurately reflects that Israeli proposal, a proposal that we worked with the Israelis on, so I know of no gaps to speak of." Now, Hamas has pushed back on this as well, putting out a statement just a few days ago through Osama Hamdan, saying, quote, "It is clear that the Israeli response does not mention an agreement to a permanent ceasefire, nor does it respond to the complete withdrawal of its occupation forces from the Gaza Strip. This is not consistent with the position that U.S. President Biden spoke about in his speech regarding a permanent ceasefire and comprehensive withdrawal, which we received positively and expressed our satisfaction with. We also call on the mediators for a clear position from the Israeli occupation regarding its commitment to a permanent ceasefire and comprehensive withdrawal." So it shouldn't be, if anybody who's been following this war and these ceasefire negotiations, that shouldn't be a shock. We have two hard lines drawn in the sand. One is that Israel will not agree to a ceasefire while Hamas remains in power, and will not agree to a ceasefire while the hostages remain in Gaza. The other side of that is Hamas will not agree to a ceasefire while Israeli forces continue to operate in Gaza. Both have drawn those hard lines and haven't really seen any middle ground quite yet. Now, new reporting just coming out a couple days ago suggested that President Biden and his team put this agreement forward even though Israel had not agreed to it, to kind of pressure them into accepting a deal, which I'm not sure that's going to work out. I'm not sure it is working out. So they said when U.S. President Biden publicly aired a Gaza ceasefire proposal developed by Israel and the United States and sent it to Hamas, he made the announcement without seeking agreement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, said three U.S. officials familiar with the matter. They say the decision to announce unilaterally, an unusual step for the United States to take with such a close ally, was deliberate and narrowed the room for Israel or Hamas to back away from the deal. One of the officials was quoted as saying, "Biden thought it was important to lay out the details publicly so that the whole world can see what was in here and the whole world can see how seriously Israel was taking this, and to make it clear that Hamas absolutely needs to accept this proposal." There's a lot of political jockeying going on here, right? But it's hard to see how this is helping at all. If anything, it seems like it got people's hopes up, suggesting that at least one side is on board with this proposal, and now the United States is pushing it, when that doesn't appear to have been the case. There's some hard lines that have been drawn in Israel at this point, and from what I've seen at least, the peace proposal that Biden has put forward is not meeting a lot of those requests. So it's hard to see that this goes really anywhere from here. But of course, just like everything else, worth keeping an eye on. That's all I got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, which is linked in the description below. Yesterday, interesting article about the Wagner Group rebranding to the Africa Corps down in Africa, kind of expanding their footprint there. Pretty interesting articles. We got some podcasts up there as well, ad-free, sponsor-free videos, and quite a bit more. Again, linked in the description if interested. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.